The little girl calls the CEO and says, "If your son received a gift, don't open it. Call 911 now." If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and type "Amen" in the comments. A beautiful piece of good news may come your way very soon. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. The autumn wind carried the scent of roasted chestnuts and exhaust fumes through the bustling streets of Manhattan's financial district. Thomas Richardson, 32 and worth more than most small countries, adjusted his Italian leather briefcase as he walked toward his favorite restaurant, Le Bernardin. His perfectly tailored Armani suit caught the late afternoon sunlight that filtered between the towering glass buildings, each step echoing the confidence of a man who had never known failure. The sidewalks teemed with the usual Friday evening crowd, investment bankers hurrying to catch trains to the Hamptons, tourists craning their necks at the architectural marvels overhead, and street vendors calling out their wares in a symphony of languages. Thomas moved through it all like a shark through water, his presence commanding respect without him having to say a word. At his side walked his 5-year-old son, Jacob, a miniature version of himself with sandy blonde hair that caught the light like spun gold and piercing blue eyes that held all the wonder of childhood. The boy wore a small black hoodie and designer jeans that probably cost more than most people made in a week, his tiny hand securely held in his father's massive grip. They had made this walk every Friday for the past 2 years, their special father-son tradition that Thomas treasured more than any business deal, more than any acquisition, more than any of the billions that flowed through his accounts. "Daddy, can we get the chocolate souffle again?" Jacob asked, his voice carrying that pure innocence that only children possess, unmarked by the cynicism and calculation that defined Thomas's adult world. "Of course, buddy. Whatever you want," Thomas replied, his voice softening in a way that would have surprised his business associates. In the boardroom, he was ruthless, a predator who devoured weak companies and left competitors in ruins. With Jacob, he melted like butter in summer sun. The transformation was remarkable to witness. The same man who had closed a $2 billion merger that morning without blinking now crouched down to tie his son's shoelace, his movements gentle and patient. This was the side of Thomas Richardson that only Jacob ever saw, the loving father who read bedtime stories with different voices for each character, who built elaborate Lego castles on Sunday mornings, who never missed a parent-teacher conference despite managing a global empire. Neither of them noticed the small figure hunched near the restaurant's back entrance, sorting through garbage bags with the desperate efficiency of someone who had learned survival too young. 6-year-old Madison crouched behind a dumpster, her long blonde hair matted and dirty falling in tangled waves around her thin shoulders. Her pink hoodie, once vibrant and new, now bore the stains of countless nights sleeping rough. Coffee stains from discarded cups, mud from sidewalk puddles, and darker marks she tried not to think about. Her small hands trembled not just from the October cold that cut through her inadequate clothing, but from hunger that gnawed at her constantly, like a living thing inside her chest. She had learned to ignore the pain, to push it down until it became just another part of her existence, like the ache in her back from sleeping on concrete, or the constant fear that lived in her throat. Madison had been watching this restaurant for weeks, learning the patterns of when the kitchen staff disposed of the day's leftovers. The timing was crucial. Too early and the bags would be empty, too late and the garbage trucks would have already come. Friday evenings were usually good. Sometimes she could find half-eaten bread rolls that wealthy diners had barely touched, or pieces of expensive desserts that seemed criminal to waste when she hadn't eaten a full meal in days. She had developed a system, a survival strategy born of necessity. First, she would check for security guards or police officers who might chase her away. Then she would wait for the kitchen staff to finish their cigarette breaks and return inside. Only then would she emerge from her hiding spot to quietly search through the discarded food for anything edible. It wasn't much, but it kept her and her guardian alive for another day. Sarah Walsh, who claimed to be her aunt but treated her more like an unwanted burden, spent most of their welfare money on wine and cigarettes, leaving Madison to fend for herself more often than not. As Thomas and Jacob disappeared through the restaurant's elegant front entrance, Madison pressed herself deeper into the shadows. She had learned to be invisible. It was safer that way. The bruises on her arms, hidden beneath her hoodie sleeves, were testament to what happened when she drew the wrong kind of attention. Some were from Sarah's drunken rages, others from older men who hung around the shelter where they sometimes slept, and a few from other homeless kids who competed for the same resources. The contrast between her world and the world she glimpsed through the restaurant's windows was so stark, it might as well have been different planets. Through the glass, she could see families laughing over elaborate meals, children who looked clean and healthy and loved, parents who smiled at their offspring instead of seeing them as burdens. Inside Le Bernardin, Thomas settled into his usual corner booth, the one that offered both privacy and a clear view of the restaurant's main dining area. The table was perpetually reserved for him. Money had that effect on service industries. The maître d'Henri greeted them with the warm familiarity of someone who had served the Richardson family for years and understood exactly how much his discretion and loyalty were worth. The usual table, Mr. Richardson? And perhaps the young gentleman would like to start with his favorite apple juice? Henry's French accent lent an air of sophistication to even the simplest interactions. Thomas nodded, lifting Jacob onto the plush velvet seat that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The restaurant hummed with the quiet conversations of New York's elite, merger discussions disguised as casual dinners, political dealings wrapped in wine selections, and social climbing masquerading as friendship. This was Thomas's natural habitat, a world where a single handshake could move millions and where reputation was more valuable than gold. The menu at Le Bernardin didn't list prices. If you had to ask, you couldn't afford to eat there. Thomas had brought business associates here countless times, using the restaurant's prestige and Henri's impeccable service to create the right atmosphere for delicate negotiations. But Friday evenings belonged to Jacob alone. "Daddy, look at that lady's pretty dress," Jacob whispered, pointing toward a woman in an emerald gown at a nearby table. "It's not polite to point, Jacob." Thomas gently redirected his son's hand while simultaneously making a mental note to remind Mrs. Patterson to review proper etiquette during their Monday lessons. "But yes, it's very beautiful." Jacob nodded solemnly, absorbing the lesson with the serious attention he gave to all his father's guidance. Thomas was raising his son to be a gentleman, someone who would inherit not just wealth but also the responsibility and character to use it wisely. What Thomas couldn't see from his angle was the conversation taking place 3 tables away, where a woman with sharp features and calculating eyes leaned across the white tablecloth toward her companion, a man whose nervous energy was palpable even from a distance. The woman's emerald dress, the same one Jacob had admired, cost more than most people's cars, but her face held a hardness that no amount of luxury could soften. "The package needs to be delivered tomorrow evening," the woman, Victoria Blackwood, said in a voice barely above a whisper. Her words carried the crisp precision of someone accustomed to giving orders and seeing them obeyed without question. "Make sure it looks like a gift from a secret admirer. The boy won't suspect anything." Victoria Blackwood was a name that appeared in society pages and business journals with equal frequency. Heiress to the Blackwood shipping fortune, she moved through New York's elite circles like a shark through bloodied water, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. But tonight, beneath her perfect makeup and designer dress, something darker motivated her actions. Her companion, Marcus Chen, shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his designer suit unable to hide the nervous sweat that had begun to bead on his forehead. Marcus was a mid-level executive at one of Thomas's subsidiary companies, someone who had access to the Richardson family's private information, but lacked the moral backbone to resist Victoria's particular brand of persuasion. "Are you certain about this? He's just a child. There has to be another way to get to Richardson." Marcus's voice carried the tremor of a man who knew he was crossing a line from which there might be no return. Victoria's laugh was as cold as winter rain, devoid of any warmth or humanity. "Thomas Richardson destroyed my father's company 20 years ago, left him bankrupt and broken. Daddy never recovered from the humiliation, died of a heart attack within 6 months, stress-induced according to the doctors. This is poetic justice, taking away the thing he loves most, just like he took everything from my family." The story was one that had shaped Victoria's entire adult life. 20 years ago, when she was just 12 years old, Thomas Richardson had orchestrated a hostile takeover of Blackwood Shipping that left her father's company in ruins. What had been a family business spanning 3 generations was stripped for parts and sold off piece by piece, leaving the Blackwood name as nothing more than a footnote in business school case studies about corporate raiders. But the boy... Marcus started to protest, but Victoria cut him off with a gesture as sharp as a blade. "We'll be fine if Richardson agrees to our terms. All we need is his signature on the merger documents, and then Jacob comes home safe and sound. Simple business transaction." Victoria's smile was predatory, lacking any trace of maternal warmth despite her words about the child's safety. Madison, who had finally mustered the courage to slip through the restaurant service entrance during a busy moment when the kitchen staff was distracted, heard every word. She had positioned herself behind a large decorative plant near their table, invisible to the dining patrons but close enough to hear the woman's venomous whisper. The service entrance was supposed to be locked, but Madison had discovered weeks ago that one of the kitchen workers often propped it open during cigarette breaks, creating a gap just wide enough for a small, desperate child to squeeze through. She had used this route before to search for food scraps, timing her entries for the brief windows when the kitchen was between shifts. Her heart hammered against her thin chest as the full meaning of their conversation sank in. She knew who Thomas Richardson was. She had seen his picture in discarded newspapers often enough, usually accompanied by headlines about billion-dollar deals or charitable donations. The billionaire CEO who owned half of Manhattan, whose face appeared on magazine covers and business news programs. And she knew the little boy with blonde hair who came here every Friday with his father. She had watched them through the windows during her food searches, feeling a strange pang of longing for something she couldn't name. The way the man looked at his son with such obvious love, the way he listened carefully to the child's chatter, the way he smiled. It was everything Madison remembered about her own father before he had disappeared from her life. But now, that same little boy was in danger, and Madison was the only one who knew. As Victoria and Marcus concluded their sinister planning, discussing timing and logistics with the cold efficiency of military strategists, Madison remained frozen behind the plant. Her mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. She had to warn them somehow, but how could a homeless 6-year-old approach one of the most powerful men in the city? The impossibility of her situation threatened to overwhelm her. She was nobody, a street kid without family, without resources, without any reason for someone like Thomas Richardson to believe her, even if she could somehow reach him. Who would listen to the ravings of a homeless child about elaborate murder plots? But as she watched Thomas laugh at something Jacob said, his whole face lighting up with paternal love that reminded her painfully of her own lost father, Madison knew she had to try. That little boy deserved to be safe and loved, just like she had once been before her world fell apart. The answer came to her as they prepared to leave the restaurant, Victoria and Marcus departing first with the casual confidence of people who believed their plans were undetectable. Madison memorized every detail of their faces, burning the images into her memory with the intensity of someone whose survival had always depended on noticing and remembering dangerous people. She watched as Thomas and Jacob finished their meal, noting the way Thomas helped his son with his coat, the way he listened patiently to Jacob's excited chatter about school and friends. The love between them was palpable, real, and Madison felt her resolve strengthen. Tomorrow she would save Jacob Richardson's life, even if it meant risking her own. She had to find a way to contact his father, to make him believe an impossible story from an impossible source. The restaurant's warmth faded behind them as they stepped into the cool evening air, completely unaware that their lives had just intersected with someone who would change everything. Madison remained in the shadows, her small fists clenched with determination that belonged to someone far older than her 6 years. She had work to do, and less than 24 hours to figure out how to do it. The next evening arrived with the kind of October chill that made even New Yorkers hurry their steps, their breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. Thomas sat in his penthouse office on the 47th floor of Richardson Tower, the city's lights twinkling below like fallen stars scattered across black velvet. His assistant had left hours ago, but he remained, reviewing contracts and preparing for Monday's board meeting that would determine the fate of a pharmaceutical company his conglomerate was acquiring. The familiar weight of responsibility pressed against his shoulders. $20 billion in assets didn't manage themselves, and every decision he made affected thousands of employees, millions of shareholders, and countless communities around the world. The pharmaceutical acquisition alone would impact hundreds of thousands of patients who depended on affordable medications, a responsibility that kept him working long past reasonable hours. His phone buzzed with a text from his nanny. Jacob safe at home, had dinner, refused vegetables again, and bath. Reading bedtime story now. He chose the dinosaur book again. Sweet dreams. Mrs. Patterson. Thomas smiled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Mrs. Patterson had been with their family for 3 years, ever since his ex-wife had signed away her parental rights and disappeared into her cocaine-fueled spiral of self-destruction. The older woman had become more than just hired help. She was Jacob's surrogate grandmother, the maternal figure he desperately needed. Jacob was his anchor, the one pure thing in a world built on calculated risks and strategic manipulations. Since Elena had chosen her addiction over their son, Thomas had made sure Jacob wanted for nothing. The best schools, the finest tutors, every opportunity money could buy. But more importantly, all the love and attention a father could provide. The irony wasn't lost on him that in building a business empire designed to secure Jacob's future, he sometimes missed precious moments of Jacob's present. But tonight, reviewing contracts in his empty office, Thomas told himself it was all for his son's benefit. Meanwhile, across the city, in a cramped studio apartment above a failing bodega, Madison huddled on a stained mattress beside her guardian, 38-year-old Sarah Walsh. The apartment reeked of cigarettes, stale wine, and the kind of hopelessness that seeped into the walls of places where dreams went to die. Sarah wasn't really her aunt, despite what the forged documents claimed and what she told social workers during their infrequent visits. She was a distant family friend who had taken Madison in after her mother's death from cancer 2 years ago, motivated more by the small monthly checks from social services than genuine care. The arrangement benefited Sarah more than Madison. Government assistance, food stamps, and housing vouchers that Sarah often converted to cash for her own needs, while Madison made do with whatever scraps remained. It was a common enough story in the system. Children placed with adults who saw them as meal tickets rather than human beings deserving of love and protection. "Stop moving around so much," Sarah grumbled from her side of the mattress, her breath reeking of cheap wine and the cigarettes she chain-smoked when her anxiety peaked. "Some of us need to sleep." Sarah had been drinking more heavily lately, ever since her latest boyfriend had left and taken with him the small contributions he had made to their household expenses. The eviction notice tucked behind the kitchen clock was evidence of just how precarious their situation had become. Madison lay perfectly still, her mind churning with the conversation she had overheard at the restaurant. She had spent the entire day figuring out how to warn the Richardson family, but every plan seemed impossible. How could someone like her contact someone like him? What words could a 6-year-old possibly use to convince a billionaire that his son was in mortal danger? She had considered going to the police, but her previous experiences with law enforcement had not been encouraging. Police officers looked at homeless children with suspicion rather than concern, often assuming they were lying or trying to scam money from tourists. And even if they believed her, what could she tell them? She didn't know Victoria's last name, couldn't provide an address, had no proof beyond her own testimony. The answer had come from the most unlikely source. Old Mrs. Chen, who ran the corner grocery store where Madison sometimes spent food stamps on day-old bread and expired milk. While making her meager purchases that afternoon, Madison had overheard Mrs. Chen talking to another customer about how the fancy restaurant downtown had connections to all the important people in the city. "They probably know everyone important," Mrs. Chen had said in her heavily accented English, gesturing with hands weathered by decades of hard work. "Rich people all stick together, you know? Like a club that poor people can't join." The comment had sparked an idea in Madison's desperate mind. If the restaurant served important people like Thomas Richardson, maybe they would have a way to contact him. Maybe they kept phone numbers for their wealthy customers, the way hotels kept special services for VIP guests. It was a long shot, probably impossible, but it was the only shot she had. Now, as Sarah's snores filled the tiny apartment, Madison crept toward the ancient landline phone in the kitchen. The phone was older than she was, a relic from the previous tenant that Sarah had never bothered to replace. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But tonight Madison needed it to be functioning more than she had ever needed anything in her short, difficult life. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the restaurant's number, which she had memorized from a crumpled business card found in a trash bin outside Le Bernardin. The numbers seemed to glow in her mind, 5550263. She had repeated them to herself hundreds of times throughout the day, terrified of forgetting them when the moment came. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Le Bernardin, this is Henri speaking. How may I assist you this evening? Madison's throat felt dry as sand, her voice catching on the words she had rehearsed all day. Hello, I need to get a phone number for someone. I'm sorry, little one, but we don't provide personal information about our guests. This is a matter of privacy and security, you understand? Is there an adult I could speak with? Panic shot through Madison's chest like ice water. If she hung up now, Jacob would be in danger tomorrow, and she would have failed the one chance she might have to save him. She thought about the way Thomas had smiled at his son, the gentle way he had corrected Jacob's pointing, the obvious love between them. Please, she whispered, tears starting to form in her eyes. It's about Mr. Richardson, the man who comes with the little blonde boy. I saw bad people planning to hurt them. I need to warn him. Henri's voice changed immediately, becoming warmer and more concerned. Mon Dieu, child, are you certain? What kind of danger? A bomb, Madison said simply. They're going to send him a present with a bomb inside for the little boy. Please, I need to tell him. The urgency in her voice convinced Henri in a way that no elaborate lie could have. Children didn't typically know about explosives unless they had overheard something genuinely dangerous. Hold on, dear, let me see if I have his personal number in our VIP contacts. Madison's heart hammered so loudly she was sure Henri could hear it through the phone. Minutes passed like hours before Henri returned to the line. Here we are. His private mobile number is 5555147. But dear, it's quite late. Perhaps you should call the police instead. I'll call them too, Madison promised, though she knew from experience that police rarely took homeless children seriously. Thank you so much, Mr. Henri. Madison hung up before Henri could ask any more questions. She stared at the number scrawled on a napkin with a broken crayon she had found in the couch cushions, her entire body shaking with a combination of fear and determination. This was insane. She was about to call one of the most powerful men in America and try to convince him that his son was in mortal danger, based on a conversation she had overheard while hiding behind a plant. He would probably hang up immediately, or worse, have her arrested for harassment. But Jacob's life might depend on this phone call, and that was more important than her fear. With trembling fingers that felt disconnected from her body, she dialed the number. Thomas was reviewing quarterly projections for his European holdings when his personal phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number with a local area code, which he normally would have ignored or let go to voicemail. His personal number was closely guarded, known only to family, close friends, and essential business contacts. But something made him answer, perhaps a premonition, or maybe just the unusual timing of a call so late in the evening. Thomas Richardson speaking. The voice that came through the phone was small, scared, and completely unexpected. A child's voice, high-pitched with terror and urgency. Mr. Richardson? Your son received a gift today, right? Don't let him open it. Call the police now. Thomas nearly dropped the phone, his professional composure shattered by the impossible words coming through the speaker. Excuse me? Who is this? Please, Mr. Richardson. I heard them talking. The lady with the green dress and the nervous man at your restaurant. They're going to hurt Jacob with a package. Don't let him open anything, please. The line went dead, leaving Thomas staring at his phone in stunned silence. Someone had just warned him about a package for Jacob, a child's voice, terrified and urgent, speaking with the kind of panic that couldn't be faked. And she knew about his restaurant, about people planning something. His blood turned to ice as he remembered Mrs. Patterson mentioning that someone had delivered a gift for Jacob that afternoon. A beautiful box with a card saying it was from a secret admirer, she had said, laughing about how Jacob was too young for such romantic gestures. I put it on his dresser to wait for you to come home." Without hesitation, Thomas dialed Mrs. Patterson's number while simultaneously calling his security team on his office line. Years of business negotiations had taught him to think quickly and act decisively, but this was different. This was his son's life hanging in the balance. "Mrs. Patterson, where's that package that was delivered for Jacob today?" "Oh, Mr. Richardson, it's sitting on his dresser right next to his dinosaur lamp. Such lovely wrapping paper, silver with a blue ribbon. He wanted to open it immediately, but I told him to wait until you got home, as you've always taught him about gifts from strangers. Do not let him touch it. Get out of the apartment right now. Take Jacob and go to the lobby immediately. Don't stop to pack anything. Don't worry about shoes or coats. Just get out. Security is on their way up." Mrs. Patterson's voice shifted from confusion to alarm as she processed the urgency in Thomas's tone. "Mr. Richardson, what's wrong? What's happening?" "Just do what I'm telling you. Take Jacob and get out now. I'll explain everything later." Thomas was already moving toward his private elevator, his security team mobilizing through their earpieces as he coordinated the emergency response. 20 years of corporate warfare had taught him that when someone threatened what you loved, you struck back with overwhelming force. 23 minutes later, the bomb squad confirmed Thomas's worst fears. The gift contained enough plastic explosives to level half the floor, connected to a timer that would have detonated when Jacob attempted to open the seemingly innocent package. As police swarmed his building and Jacob was safely relocated to a secure hotel with Mrs. Patterson, Thomas couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious phone call. A little girl had just saved his son's life, providing information that no one else could have known. But who was she? How did she know about the plot? And why had she risked whatever consequences might come from contacting him? The questions multiplied as Detective Santos interviewed him, taking notes about business rivals and potential enemies, while forensics teams processed evidence that might lead them to the bombers. But through it all, Thomas's mind kept returning to that terrified little voice and the courage it must have taken for a child to make that call. Somewhere across the city, Madison curled up on her stained mattress, tears of relief streaming down her face. Jacob was safe. She had done the right thing, and somehow, miraculously, the rich man had believed her. Tomorrow, she was certain, everything would change. She just hoped she would be brave enough to face whatever came next. The bomb squad finished their meticulous work at 3:47 a.m., their equipment detecting trace amounts of military-grade explosives that confirmed what Thomas already knew in his bones. Someone with serious resources and connections had tried to murder his 5-year-old son. Detective Maria Santos, a weathered woman with kind eyes and 20 years of experience dealing with the worst humanity had to offer, sat across from him in the hotel's executive suite, while Jacob slept peacefully in the adjoining room, blissfully unaware of how close he had come to tragedy. The hotel Thomas had chosen was the Plaza, a fortress of luxury and security where celebrities and world leaders stayed when they needed protection from the outside world. The presidential suite cost more per night than most people earned in a month, but money was irrelevant when Jacob's safety hung in the balance. The explosive was sophisticated, Detective Santos explained, her notepad filled with technical details that made Thomas's stomach turn. C4 plastic explosive, professional-grade timing device, motion sensor trigger. Whoever did this has military or intelligence connections and access to materials that aren't available to common criminals. Thomas paced the suite's living room, unable to sit still while his son's would-be murderers remained free. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan sparkled with lights that usually comforted him, but now seemed like 1,000 watching eyes. And if that little girl hadn't called? Thomas couldn't finish the sentence, the words sticking in his throat like broken glass. Your son would be dead, Mr. Richardson, along with your nanny and probably several neighbors in the building. The blast radius would have been substantial. Detective Santos leaned forward, her expression grave. This mysterious caller, you're absolutely certain it was a child? Absolutely. 6, maybe 7 years old at most. Female. And she knew specific details about people in a restaurant plotting against Jacob, a woman in a green dress and a nervous man. We'll need you to think carefully about any enemies, anyone who might want to hurt you through your son. Business rivals, disgruntled employees, anyone with a grudge. In your position, The list could be extensive. Thomas's mind immediately went to the dozens of companies he had acquired over the years, the hostile takeovers that had made him billions while leaving former CEOs and employees devastated. The Richardson empire had been built on a foundation of calculated aggression that had earned him equal measures of respect and hatred in the business world. There was the Henderson family, whose shipping company he had dismantled 5 years ago. The Blackwood Corporation that had fought him tooth and nail before ultimately succumbing to his superior resources. Dozens of smaller firms that had been absorbed into his conglomerate, their former owners scattered to the winds. But attempting to murder a child crossed lines that even the most bitter business rivals rarely approached. This felt personal in a way that corporate warfare never did. Meanwhile, across the city in a cramped studio apartment above a failing bodega, Madison lay awake staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a butterfly with one broken wing. Sarah had passed out hours ago, empty wine bottles scattered around her like fallen soldiers in a battle she fought and lost every night. The apartment reeked of cigarettes and disappointment, overlaid with the smell of garbage from the bodega below and exhaust fumes from the busy street outside. But Madison barely noticed anymore. When survival was your primary concern, comfort became a luxury you couldn't afford to miss. She kept replaying the phone call in her mind, analyzing every word Thomas had spoken, every inflection in his voice. Had she done enough? Was Jacob really safe? And what would happen when they discovered she wasn't really his daughter as Henri had assumed? The worry sat heavy in her chest, but she pushed down her guilt and focused on the important thing. Jacob was alive because of her actions. That had to count for something, even if she had let people make wrong assumptions to achieve it. As dawn broke over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded her of better times when her mother was alive, Madison made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find those evil people before they could hurt Jacob again. But first she had to survive another day with Sarah, whose hangovers were almost as dangerous as her drunken rages. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp October beauty that made New York feel like the center of the universe. Thomas returned to his penthouse with a small army of security personnel, former military specialists who moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had seen real combat and understood that threats could come from any direction. Every package, every delivery, every visitor would now be scrutinized through multiple layers of security that would have impressed heads of state. Thomas had learned that money couldn't buy safety if you weren't careful about how you deployed it. "Daddy, why are there so many people with guns in our house?" Jacob asked over breakfast, his innocent eyes wide with curiosity rather than fear. Children had a remarkable ability to adapt to new circumstances without the anxiety that plagued adults. Thomas knelt beside his son's chair, choosing his words carefully. He had always believed in age-appropriate honesty with Jacob, but explaining attempted murder to a 5-year-old required delicate navigation. "Some bad people tried to play a mean trick on us, buddy. These are the good guys who make sure we stay safe, like police officers, but just for our family." "Like superheroes?" "Exactly like superheroes. They're here to protect us so we can keep having our Friday dinners and weekend adventures." Jacob seemed satisfied with this explanation, returning to his cereal with the resilience that Thomas both admired and envied. But as Thomas hugged his son, breathing in the scent of his shampoo and feeling the solid reality of his small body, his mind kept returning to the mysterious caller. Who was this little girl who had risked everything to save a stranger? How had she known about the plot? And most importantly, was she safe? Or had her heroic actions put her in danger from the same people who wanted to harm Jacob? The answer began to unfold that afternoon, when Henri from Le Bernardin called, his usually composed voice tight with worry and confusion. "Mr. Richardson, I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but something troubling has come to my attention. Last night, a young girl called the restaurant asking for your phone number. She said she had overheard people planning to hurt you and your son with a bomb." Thomas felt his carefully controlled world tilt on its axis. What exactly did she sound like? Very young, very frightened. She spoke with the kind of desperation that breaks your heart, you know. She begged me to help her warn you, said she saw bad people planning to hurt your little boy. The urgency in her voice. I believed her immediately. Did she say anything else? Anything that might help us find her? Only that she needed to warn you about a present. She seemed to know your routine, knew about your Friday dinners with Jacob. I've been thinking about it all day. How would a homeless child know such specific details about your family? That evening, against the strong advice of his security team, Thomas made a decision that would change the trajectory of his life forever. He returned to Le Bernardin, not for dinner, but to search for answers that might explain how a homeless child had become the guardian angel his family never knew they needed. Sir, this is extremely unwise. His head of security, Marcus Stone, a former Navy SEAL with 20 years of special operations experience, urged as they approached the restaurant. If whoever planted that bomb discovers you're investigating, they might try again. That little girl risked everything to save Jacob's life, Thomas replied, his voice carrying the steel that had made him billions. I'm not going to abandon her to whatever circumstances drove her to such desperate measures. They approached the building systematically, Stone's team creating a security perimeter while Thomas focused on finding traces of the mysterious child. Behind the restaurant, near the dumpsters where the kitchen staff disposed of daily waste, he found the first tangible clue, a small piece of pink fabric caught on a jagged piece of broken fence. The fabric was dirty, worn thin from constant use and repeated washing in harsh detergents or possibly just cold water. It was clearly from a child's clothing, abandoned in haste by someone who had been hiding in this exact spot. Sir, we should go back inside, Stone urged, his trained eyes scanning the shadows for potential threats. It's not safe to be out here in the open like this. But Thomas ignored him, crouching beside the dumpster with the same focused intensity he brought to billion-dollar negotiations. There, pressed into the soft earth still damp from the previous night's rain, were small footprints. A child had been here recently, hiding, watching, waiting for something or someone. Someone's been living rough back here, Stone observed, his military training allowing him to read the scene like a book. That fabric's been weathered for months, not days. Look at the wear patterns, the way the edges are frayed. Whoever this kid is, she's been surviving on the streets for a significant period. The realization hit Thomas like a physical blow to his chest. A homeless child. A little girl with nowhere to go and no one to protect her, who had somehow risked everything to save his son from people who wanted to hurt him. The weight of that sacrifice threatened to overwhelm him. While he lived in a penthouse and worried about stock portfolios, a 6-year-old was sleeping behind dumpsters and scrounging for food scraps. Yet she had found the courage and compassion to save Jacob, when she could have easily minded her own business and stayed safe in the shadows. As they prepared to leave, having found no additional clues but confirmed that the mysterious caller was indeed connected to this location, a soft voice emerged from the shadows behind them, tentative and scared but unmistakably real. You're him, aren't you? The father from the restaurant. Thomas spun around to see a small figure step into the dim light cast by the restaurant's backdoor security lamp. The girl was tiny, clearly malnourished, with long blonde hair that caught the light like spun gold, despite its tangled, unwashed condition. Her pink hoodie was indeed torn, matching the fabric they had found, and her jeans were several sizes too big, held up by a rope belt that spoke of long-term poverty. But it was her eyes that stopped Thomas cold and made his heart skip several beats. They were blue, a startling shade that seemed familiar though he couldn't place why, and they held a mixture of hope and terror that spoke of experiences no child should ever have to endure. You saved my son? Thomas said softly, instinctively crouching down to her level so he wouldn't appear threatening. His security team tensed, but he waved them back with a gesture. Madison nodded, her small chin trembling with the effort of controlling emotions too big for her small body. Is he okay? Jacob? The little boy with the blonde hair who likes chocolate souffle? The specificity of her knowledge about Jacob's preferences confirmed what Thomas already suspected. This child had been watching his family for some time, learning their patterns and routines from her hiding place behind the restaurant. He's safe because of you, Thomas replied, his voice thick with gratitude that went beyond words. What's your name, sweetheart? Madison. Madison Walsh. She paused, then added in a whisper that barely carried across the small distance between them. My mommy called me Maddie before she died. Maddie? Where do you live? Where are your parents? Thomas asked gently, though he suspected he already knew part of the answer based on the evidence of her living situation. My mommy died 2 years ago. Cancer. Madison's voice was matter-of-fact in the way children spoke about tragedies they had been forced to accept as normal. I live with Sarah now, but she's not really my aunt like she tells people. She just says that so she can get money for keeping me. Thomas felt a cold anger building in his chest at the thought of an adult exploiting this brave child's tragic circumstances. And your father? What happened to him? What happened? Madison's face crumpled with the kind of pain that belonged to someone much older. He left when I was really little. Mommy said he got scared when she got sick and couldn't handle taking care of us anymore. The simple, devastating truth of abandonment hit Thomas hard. This child had lost everyone who was supposed to protect her, yet she had still found the courage to protect someone else's child. Maddie, Thomas said carefully, would you like to come with me? I can make sure you're safe and have enough to eat. You don't have to live on the streets anymore. Madison stared at him with those impossibly blue eyes, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. Why would you want to help me? I'm nobody special. The question broke Thomas's heart in ways he hadn't thought possible. You saved my son's life. That makes you the most special person in the world to me. And every child deserves to be safe and loved. As Madison took a tentative step toward him, Thomas made a silent promise that this brave little girl would never be alone or hungry or scared again. Whatever it took, whatever legal hurdles he had to overcome, he would give her the family and security she deserved. But neither of them noticed the black sedan parked across the street, or the woman with sharp features watching them through tinted windows, her face twisted with rage as she realized her perfect revenge was being complicated by an unexpected witness. Victoria Blackwood's first plan had failed, but she was far from finished with Thomas Richardson. And now she had discovered something that could be even more valuable than his beloved son. She had found his weakness, and she intended to exploit it with the ruthless efficiency that had made her one of the most feared corporate raiders in New York. The real war was just beginning, and Thomas Richardson had no idea how high the stakes were about to become. The private medical facility that Thomas rushed Madison to at 4 a.m. looked more like a luxury hotel than a hospital. Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, Thomas's personal physician and one of the most respected pediatricians in Manhattan, had agreed to meet them despite the ungodly hour, understanding that when Thomas Richardson called about a child emergency, it warranted immediate attention. Madison had never been inside a building so clean and bright. The floors gleamed like mirrors, reflecting the soft lighting that made everything seem to glow from within. She pressed closer to Thomas as they walked through corridors lined with original artwork that cost more than most people's houses, her small hand gripping his with desperate intensity. "It's okay, sweetheart," Thomas murmured, his voice gentle despite the exhaustion that lined his face. "Dr. Morgan is going to make sure you're healthy and strong. She's taken care of Jacob since he was born." The examination revealed what Thomas had already suspected but hoped wasn't true. Madison was severely malnourished, weighing barely 40 pounds when she should have weighed at least 50. Her growth had been stunted by years of inadequate nutrition, and she showed signs of chronic stress that no 6-year-old should ever display. "She's going to need extensive nutritional rehabilitation, Dr. Morgan explained quietly while Madison slept on the examination table, finally succumbing to exhaustion in the first safe place she had known in years. "Her development has been significantly impacted. We're looking at months of careful feeding and monitoring to get her back to normal growth patterns." Thomas studied Madison's sleeping face, noting the dark circles under her eyes, and the way her small body seemed to curl in on itself even in sleep, as if preparing for the next threat. Her blonde hair, now clean from the bath, Dr. Morgan had insisted upon, revealed its true color, a shade that seemed somehow familiar, though he couldn't place why. "There are also signs of physical abuse," Dr. Morgan continued, her professional demeanor unable to hide her anger. "Old bruises, some scarring on her arms and back. Whoever has been caring for her has been doing a poor job at best and at worst." She left the sentence unfinished. "That ends now," Thomas said with the quiet certainty that had built his empire. "I want to begin the process of becoming her legal guardian immediately, whatever it takes, whatever it costs. By dawn, Thomas's legal team was already mobilizing. Emergency custody petitions were filed, investigations into Sarah Walsh's fitness as a guardian were initiated, and social workers were dispatched to assess Madison's current living situation. Thomas Richardson's resources, when focused on a single goal, were formidable. But while lawyers worked their magic through proper channels, Victoria Blackwood was orchestrating a different kind of legal maneuvering. She had spent the morning making phone calls to carefully cultivated contacts in Child Protective Services, planting seeds of doubt about Thomas Richardson's sudden interest in a homeless child. "I'm just concerned," Victoria told Monica Clark, a social worker whose gambling debts made her vulnerable to financial persuasion, "about a billionaire suddenly claiming he wants to adopt a street child with no documentation. It seems suspicious, don't you think? Like maybe he's trying to cover up something inappropriate." The implication hung in the air like poison gas. In a world where wealthy men were increasingly scrutinized for their relationships with vulnerable children, Victoria's carefully chosen words carried maximum impact. Meanwhile, Jacob was experiencing his own crisis at the family's safe house. Mrs. Patterson had tried to explain why his father wasn't coming home immediately, why strange men with guns were everywhere, and why he couldn't go to school or see his friends. At 5 years old, Jacob's understanding of the situation was limited, but his emotional response was profound. "I want Daddy," he sobbed into Mrs. Patterson's shoulder as she tried to comfort him with stories and toys that suddenly seemed meaningless. "Why can't Daddy come home? Why are the bad people trying to hurt us?" Thomas's heart broke when Mrs. Patterson called with updates about Jacob's deteriorating emotional state. He was caught between two children who needed him desperately, the son he had raised and loved, and the girl who had saved both their lives. "Bring him here," Thomas decided after an hour of listening to Jacob's cries through the phone. "The medical facility is secure, and maybe meeting Madison will help him understand why all this is happening." The reunion between the children was unlike anything Thomas could have predicted. Jacob, still sniffling from his emotional breakdown, approached Madison with the cautious curiosity that children display when meeting potential new friends. Madison, awake now and dressed in clean clothes that Dr. Morgan had procured, watched Jacob with wide eyes that held a mixture of recognition and wonder. "You're the boy from the restaurant," Madison said softly, her voice carrying the weight of everything she had done to protect him. "The one who likes chocolate souffle?" Jacob's eyes widened with recognition. "You were watching us? Are you the one who saved me from the bad present?" "Yeah." Madison nodded, suddenly shy. "I heard the mean people talking about hurting you. I couldn't let that happen." What followed was the kind of instant connection that children form without adult complications or reservations. Within minutes, Jacob was showing Madison his favorite games on his tablet, sharing his snacks and treating her like the sister he had never known he wanted. Thomas watched their interaction with amazement and growing hope. Perhaps bringing these two traumatized children together had been exactly what both of them needed. But their moment of peace was shattered when Monica Clark arrived at the medical facility with 2 police officers and a court order that made Thomas's blood run cold. "Mr. Richardson, I'm Monica Clark from Child Protective Services. We've received concerning reports about your relationship with this child. I'm going to need to speak with her privately to assess the situation." Thomas's legal training kicked in immediately. "On what grounds?" "I've filed proper emergency custody petitions and we're following all legal protocols." "Those petitions are currently under investigation," Monica replied with the smug confidence of someone who believed she held all the cards. "Until we can verify the legitimacy of your interest in this child, she needs to be placed in protective custody." The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. They were trying to take Madison away from him, to put her back into a system that had already failed her spectacularly. He thought of Sarah Walsh's neglect, of the bruises Dr. Morgan had documented, of the years Madison had spent surviving on the streets while bureaucrats shuffled paperwork. "You're not taking her anywhere," Thomas said with deadly quiet, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never lost a battle that truly mattered to him. "Mr. Richardson, interfering with a child welfare investigation is a criminal offense," Monica warned, but Thomas could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She hadn't expected resistance from someone with the resources to fight back. Madison, who had been quietly listening to this exchange while clutching Jacob's hand, suddenly spoke up with a clarity that surprised everyone in the room. "I don't want to go with her. This man saved me from people who hurt me. He's been kind to me and Jacob. Please don't make me go back to Sarah." The raw honesty in her voice cut through the bureaucratic posturing like a knife. Even the police officers seemed uncomfortable with the idea of forcibly removing a child who clearly didn't want to leave. Dr. Morgan stepped forward with Madison's medical files. "This child shows clear signs of neglect and abuse from her previous living situation. She's malnourished, traumatized, and in need of immediate medical care. Removing her from a safe environment would be medically contraindicated." Thomas made a split-second decision that would either save Madison or create a legal nightmare that could destroy them both. "I'm not just interested in helping Madison out of charity. I have reason to believe there may be a family connection that we're currently investigating through DNA testing." It was a carefully calculated half-truth. Thomas had indeed ordered expedited DNA analysis, not because he suspected a family connection, but because he wanted comprehensive medical information to help with Madison's care. But the implication was enough to give Monica Clark pause. "What kind of family connection?" Monica demanded. "That's what we're trying to determine," Thomas replied smoothly. "Until those results are available, disrupting this child's recovery would be premature and potentially harmful." Monica Clark's confident demeanor began to crack as she realized she might be about to separate a child from a legitimate relative. The legal and public relations nightmare that could result from such an action against Thomas Richardson was not something she wanted to explain to her superiors. "We'll be monitoring this situation closely," she said, retreating with as much dignity as she could muster. "Any signs of inappropriate conduct, and we'll be back immediately." As the social workers and police officers filed out of the medical facility, Thomas felt a victory that was both sweet and temporary. He had protected Madison for now, but Victoria Blackwood was still out there, still planning, still dangerous. And he was beginning to understand that this was about much more than business rivalry or corporate revenge. This was personal, in a way that threatened everything he loved most in the world. The DNA results arrived 3 days later, with findings that shocked everyone involved. While there was no direct family relationship between Thomas and Madison, the genetic analysis revealed something unexpected. Madison's DNA showed markers consistent with a rare genetic condition that was extensively documented in Thomas's family medical history. Dr. Morgan explained the implications with scientific precision. The condition is called hereditary angioedema. It's extremely rare, affecting only about 1 in 50,000 people. The fact that both Thomas and Madison carry markers for this condition suggests they share a common ancestor, possibly several generations back. "What does that mean legally?" Thomas asked. "It means you have a legitimate basis for claiming kinship," his chief legal counsel explained. "Not immediate family, but distant cousins at minimum. Combined with your documented efforts to provide care and the child's expressed preference to remain with you, it significantly strengthens your custody petition." More importantly to Thomas, it meant that Madison truly was connected to his family in ways that went beyond circumstance and gratitude. The universe had somehow brought them together, and he was determined to honor that connection. The real test came when they moved to the Richardson family estate in the Hamptons. As their convoy approached the oceanfront compound, Thomas watched Madison's reaction to her new home with careful attention. "This is where we live sometimes," Jacob explained with the casual confidence of someone who had never known want. "When Daddy needs to think about important stuff, we come here. There's a beach and boats, and sometimes we see dolphins." Madison nodded silently, overwhelmed by the magnitude of change in her life. The house rose before them like something from a fairy tale, all weathered shingle and soaring glass, designed to blend seamlessly with the natural beauty surrounding it. "What do you think, sweetheart?" Thomas asked gently as they pulled up to the main entrance. "It's beautiful," Madison whispered, her voice carrying a note of disbelief. "But are you sure it's okay for me to be here? I don't want to break anything important." The question broke Thomas's heart. At 6 years old, Madison had learned to see herself as someone who didn't belong in nice places, someone whose presence might damage things too valuable for her to touch. "This is your home now," Thomas said firmly. "Everything here belongs to our family, which means it belongs to you too. You can't break anything that matters more than your happiness." The transformation over the following weeks was remarkable. Madison, with proper nutrition and medical care, began to bloom like a flower that had been kept too long in darkness. Her hair regained its lustrous shine, her eyes lost their haunted quality, and most importantly, she began to smile. But Victoria Blackwood was far from finished with her revenge. She had spent months planning her next move, studying Thomas's routines and relationships, looking for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came when Madison had been with the family for exactly 1 month. The October morning dawned crisp and clear at the Richardson estate, with Jacob and Madison building elaborate sandcastles on the private beach, while Thomas watched from the house, his laptop balanced on his knees as he managed urgent business calls. Mrs. Patterson had taken the children down to the water early, giving them time to play before the wind picked up later in the day. From his study window, Thomas could see the 2 children working together with the natural cooperation that had developed between them over the past month. Jacob's protective instincts toward Madison had surprised everyone. At 5 years old, he seemed to understand that his new sister needed extra care and patience as she adjusted to their world. "Daddy, look what we made," Jacob called out, waving from beside an impressive sand structure that looked suspiciously like a castle with multiple towers and a moat. Thomas waved back, his heart swelling with a contentment he hadn't felt since before his divorce. The sight of 2 happy children playing safely on his beach represented everything he had worked his entire life to achieve. Not just wealth, but the security and happiness that wealth could provide to the people he loved. His phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Morgan. "Madison's latest blood work shows significant improvement. Nutritional levels approaching normal range. You're doing an amazing job with her recovery." Thomas smiled, forwarding the message to Mrs. Patterson with a note of gratitude. The older woman had embraced Madison with the same loving care she gave to Jacob, treating both children as the grandchildren she had never had. But his moment of peaceful contentment was shattered by the sound of his security system's urgent alert. Marcus Stone's voice crackled through the intercom with the controlled urgency that meant serious trouble. "Sir, we have multiple vehicles approaching the estate perimeter. 3 black SUVs, no advance notification, not responding to our security protocols." Thomas was immediately on his feet, his business instincts shifting into high alert. "Who has access to our location?" "Very limited list, sir. This is either a coordinated law enforcement action or a serious security breach." Through his window, Thomas could see Mrs. Patterson gathering the children, her movements quick and efficient as she responded to the same security alert he had received. Jacob and Madison looked confused but obedient as she hurried them toward the house. "Get everyone inside immediately," Thomas ordered through the intercom. Full lockdown protocols. The first SUV crested the hill leading to the main house just as Mrs. Patterson reached the back door with both children. Thomas counted at least 6 figures in tactical gear emerging from the vehicles, their movements coordinated with military precision. His blood ran cold when he recognized the lead figure, Victoria Blackwood, dressed in a business suit that looked incongruous beside the armed men flanking her. She walked with the confident stride of someone who believed she held all the cards. "Mr. Richardson," Stone's voice was tight with controlled anger. "It appears we're dealing with a private military contractor. These aren't law enforcement officers." "How is that possible?" Thomas demanded, even as he was moving toward the panic room that had been built into the house's foundation. "Money, sir. Enough money can buy almost anything, including mercenaries who don't ask questions about their targets." Thomas's mind raced through possibilities and contingencies. Victoria Blackwood had somehow assembled a private army and brought them to his home. This wasn't corporate espionage or business rivalry. This was open warfare. "Sir," Stone continued, "they're demanding to speak with you. They claim to have legal authority to remove the child." The words hit Thomas like ice water. This wasn't about him or his business empire. This was about Madison. Victoria had somehow discovered the girl who had saved Jacob's life, and now she was using Madison as leverage in her twisted game of revenge. In the main living room, Madison pressed close to Jacob as they huddled with Mrs. Patterson behind the couch. The children couldn't see what was happening outside, but they could feel the tension in the air like electricity before a storm. "Are the bad people coming back?" Madison whispered, her voice carrying echoes of the terror she had experienced on the streets. "Daddy will keep us safe," Jacob said with the absolute confidence that only children possess about their parents' capabilities. He promised he would never let anyone hurt us. Mrs. Patterson held both children close, her own heart pounding as she listened to the security chatter through her earpiece. She had been with the Richardson family long enough to know that Thomas would fight to the death before allowing anyone to harm these children. Through the house's intercom system, Victoria Blackwood's voice rang out with the cold precision of someone delivering an ultimatum. "Thomas Richardson, I know you can hear me. I'm here for the girl. Madison Walsh is going to come with me, and in exchange I'll consider not destroying everything you've built over the past 20 years. Thomas keyed his microphone with steady hands, his voice carrying the authority that had made him billions. "Victoria Blackwood, I should have expected that a failed suicide bomber would escalate to armed invasion. You're trespassing on private property with armed mercenaries. That's a federal crime." "I have a court order," Victoria replied, though Thomas could hear the strain in her voice. "Monica Clark was very cooperative once I explained the situation to her. Turns out there are serious questions about your relationship with that child." Thomas's blood boiled as he realized the depth of Victoria's manipulation. She had bought a corrupt social worker and manufactured legal justification for what amounted to a kidnapping operation. "Even if that were true," Thomas said, "this is still a private military force on American soil. You've crossed lines that no amount of money can uncross." "We'll see about that," Victoria replied. "You have 5 minutes to send the girl out, or we're coming in. And Mr. Richardson? I have enough firepower here to level this entire house if necessary. Don't test my resolve." The line went dead, leaving Thomas staring at the intercom with fury and desperation warring in his chest. Victoria Blackwood had found the one threat that could bring him to his knees: the safety of the children he loved. But Thomas Richardson hadn't built a business empire by surrendering to threats no matter how overwhelming they seemed. He had 5 minutes to find a way to protect Madison and Jacob, and he intended to use every second. "Stone," he said into his microphone, "what are our options?" "Limited, sir. They have superior numbers and firepower. But they're operating illegally, which means they can't afford witnesses or complications. If we can make this too messy for them to cover up." "Do it," Thomas said without hesitation. "And contact Detective Santos immediately. Tell her we need federal assistance for an armed invasion by private military contractors." As his security team began implementing emergency protocols, Thomas made his way to the main living room, where Madison and Jacob waited with Mrs. Patterson. Both children looked up at him with trust that he was determined not to betray. "Daddy, what's happening?" Jacob asked, his voice small and scared. Thomas knelt beside both children, pulling them close as he had done so many times over the past month. "Bad people are trying to take Madison away from our family, but I promise you that's not going to happen. We take care of each other, right?" Madison looked up at him with those blue eyes that had become so precious to him. "I don't want to go with them. I want to stay with you and Jacob." "You're not going anywhere," Thomas said with fierce certainty. "You're part of this family now, and families protect each other." Outside, Victoria Blackwood checked her watch and smiled with cold satisfaction. In 3 minutes, Thomas Richardson would learn what it felt like to lose everything that mattered to him, just as her father had 20 years ago. But she had underestimated the bonds that had formed between the people inside that house, and the lengths to which a father would go to protect his children. The real battle was about to begin, and Thomas Richardson had no intention of losing. The standoff stretched into its second hour as federal agents surrounded the Richardson estate, creating a perimeter that trapped Victoria Blackwood's mercenaries in a tactical nightmare they hadn't anticipated. FBI helicopters circled overhead while SWAT teams took positions along the tree line, turning what Victoria had planned as a quick extraction into a full-scale military operation. Detective Santos coordinated the law enforcement response from a mobile command center, her face grim as she studied tactical displays showing the disposition of forces around the estate. 20 years of police work had taught her to recognize when a situation was spiraling beyond anyone's control. "This is Agent Jennifer Walsh with the FBI," came a voice through the estate's communication system. "Ms. Blackwood, you are surrounded by federal agents. Release the hostages and surrender immediately." Inside the house, Thomas felt his world shift as he heard the name. Agent Jennifer Walsh. The same last name as Madison. He looked down at the little girl pressed against his side, her blonde hair catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. "Madison," he said gently. "What was your mother's name again?" "Jennifer Walsh," Madison replied, confusion clear in her voice. "Well, why, Daddy? Is that important?" The endearment hit Thomas like lightning. Somewhere during the past month, Madison had begun calling him Daddy without either of them discussing it. It had felt natural, right? Like she had always been his daughter. But now, with an FBI agent named Jennifer Walsh coordinating the rescue operation, Thomas began to suspect that the universe had been orchestrating something far more complex than a simple case of a homeless child saving a stranger. Through the estate's security cameras, Thomas watched as Victoria Blackwood's confident demeanor began to crack under the pressure of federal attention. Her mercenaries were professional soldiers, but they hadn't signed up to fight the United States government on American soil. "This is a legitimate child welfare operation," Victoria shouted through her radio, but her voice carried a note of desperation that hadn't been there an hour earlier. "Ma'am, you are employing private military contractors in violation of federal law," Agent Walsh replied with professional calm. "Surrender now and we can resolve this peacefully." Thomas made a decision that would either save his family or put them in greater danger. "Stone, I'm going outside." "Sir, absolutely not," his head of security protested. "They have sniper positions and—" "They won't shoot me," Thomas interrupted. "Victoria Blackwood wants me alive to watch her destroy everything I love. But I'm going to end this before anyone gets hurt." He kissed both children on the forehead, Jacob clinging to him with 5-year-old desperation, while Madison watched with the old wisdom that trauma had forced upon her too early. "Stay with Mrs. Patterson," Thomas told them. "I'll be right back." Thomas walked out of his house and across the manicured lawn toward Victoria Blackwood with the same confidence he had displayed in 1,000 business negotiations. The difference was that this time, instead of arguing over profit margins, he was fighting for the lives of the children he loved. "Victoria," he called out when he was close enough to speak without shouting, "let's finish this between us. Leave the children out of it." Victoria emerged from behind one of her vehicles, flanked by 2 mercenaries who kept their weapons ready but not aimed. She had aged years in the past few hours, her perfect composure cracking under the weight of a plan that had gone catastrophically wrong. "You destroyed my family," she said, her voice carrying 20 years of accumulated hatred. "My father died believing he was a failure because of what you did to our company." "Your father's company was failing long before I acquired it," Thomas replied, keeping his voice calm and reasonable. "I followed standard business practices, legal procedures. I was 25 years old and trying to build something lasting." "Legal doesn't make it right," Victoria screamed, her careful control finally snapping. "You took everything from us. Our legacy, our reputation, our future, all for profit." Thomas felt the weight of her accusation because, in many ways, she was right. He had been ruthless in his younger years, focused on winning without considering the human cost of his victories. "You're right," he said simply, his admission stopping Victoria mid-rant. "I was young and ambitious, and I didn't think about the families that would be hurt by my decisions. I'm sorry for what happened to your father." For a moment, Victoria's gun hand wavered as she processed words she had waited 20 years to hear. "But," Thomas continued, "trying to murder innocent children won't bring your father back or restore your family's honor. It will only make you the monster you think I am." "It's too late for apologies," Victoria whispered, raising her weapon toward Thomas's chest. 20 years too late. That was when Agent Jennifer Walsh's voice crackled through the tactical radio, speaking words that would change everything. "All units hold fire. I'm going in alone." A single figure emerged from the federal perimeter, walking across the estate grounds with calm authority. Agent Walsh was tall and athletic, with blonde hair pulled back in a professional bun and blue eyes that seemed somehow familiar. As she approached, Thomas felt recognition dawning like sunrise. The shape of her face, the set of her shoulders, the way she moved. It was like looking at an older version of Madison. "Agent Walsh," Victoria called out, keeping her gun trained on Thomas. "This is a federal child welfare operation. We have proper documentation." "No, Ms. Blackwood," Agent Walsh replied, her voice carrying absolute authority. "What you have is a kidnapping operation using forged court orders and private military contractors. But more importantly, you're threatening my daughter." The words hung in the air like something fragile and precious. Thomas felt his knees weaken as the full implications crashed over him. Madison's mother hadn't died of cancer 2 years ago. She had been alive, working as an FBI agent, and Madison had been living on the streets while believing she was an orphan. "That's impossible," Victoria said, her voice cracking with confusion. "The child's mother is dead. We verified." "You verified falsified records," Agent Walsh interrupted. "Madison Walsh is my daughter. I've been undercover for the past 3 years investigating organized crime connections to government corruption. My daughter was placed in witness protection, but the system failed, and she ended up on the streets." Thomas turned toward the house where Madison was watching through the window beside Jacob. Even from a distance, he could see the moment of recognition on her small face as she looked at the woman who had given birth to her. "Mommy?" Madison's voice carried across the lawn, high and desperate, and filled with impossible hope. "Yes, baby," Agent Walsh called back, her professional composure finally cracking. "Mommy's here." What happened next unfolded like something from a dream. Madison burst out of the house, running across the lawn with Jacob close behind her, Mrs. Patterson following as fast as her elderly legs could carry her. Victoria Blackwood, faced with the collapse of her revenge plot and the arrival of federal agents who now had personal stakes in the outcome, made a final, desperate decision. She turned her gun toward the running children, her face twisted with rage and despair. "If I can't have my revenge," she screamed, "then no one gets a happy ending." Thomas moved without thinking, throwing himself between Victoria's gun and the children. Agent Walsh did the same, both adults converging on Victoria with desperate parental fury. The gun went off once, the sound echoing across the estate like thunder. When the chaos settled, Victoria Blackwood was on the ground, disarmed and restrained by federal agents. Thomas was on his knees, blood seeping through his shirt from a graze along his ribs, but alive and conscious. And Madison was in her mother's arms, both of them crying with the kind of joy that comes when impossible dreams somehow come true. "I thought you were dead," Madison sobbed into Agent Walsh's shoulder. "They told me you died of cancer." "I know, baby. I'm so sorry. The bad people I was investigating made it look like I died so they couldn't use you to hurt me. But I've been trying to find you ever since." Thomas watched the reunion through eyes blurred with pain and exhaustion, feeling a complex mixture of joy and loss. Madison had found her real mother, which was everything a child deserved. But it also meant that the family he had been building was about to change in ways he couldn't predict. Jacob, not fully understanding what was happening but recognizing that Madison was happy, hugged both mother and daughter with the generous heart that made Thomas proud to be his father. "Daddy," Jacob said, looking back at Thomas with 5-year-old concern, "You're bleeding, are you okay?" "I'm fine, buddy," Thomas replied, though Dr. Morgan would later require several stitches to close the wound. "Everything's going to be fine." Agent Walsh looked up at Thomas with gratitude that went beyond words. "Thank you for taking care of her, for giving her a family when I couldn't." "She saved my son's life," Thomas replied simply. "And she gave me the chance to learn what really matters." As paramedics treated Thomas's wound and federal agents processed Victoria Blackwood and her mercenaries, Agent Walsh sat on the estate's back porch with Madison in her lap and Jacob pressed against her side, the three of them watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson. "What happens now?" Thomas asked, joining them despite Dr. Morgan's orders to rest. "Now we figure out how to be a family," Agent Walsh replied. "My undercover assignment is finished and Madison has been through enough upheaval for one lifetime. But she talks about you and Jacob like you're already family." Madison looked up at both adults with the wisdom that trauma and love had taught her. "Can't we all be family? Mommy and Daddy and Jacob and me?" The question hung in the air like a promise of something neither Thomas nor Agent Walsh had dared to hope for. Two parents who had found each other through their children's courage, building something new from the pieces of their separate tragedies. "I think," Agent Walsh said carefully, "that sounds like the best idea anyone's had in a very long time." Thomas Richardson had spent his life acquiring companies and building wealth, but he had never made a deal that mattered more than the one they were negotiating now, the terms and conditions of becoming a real family. As the stars appeared over the Atlantic Ocean and two children fell asleep between the adults who loved them, Thomas realized that Madison Walsh had saved more than just Jacob's life that night behind the restaurant. She had saved them all, bringing together four people who needed each other more than they had ever known. The billionaire had learned that the most valuable acquisitions couldn't be bought with money. They could only be earned with love, protected with courage, and treasured for as long as forever would allow. And Thomas Richardson planned to do exactly that, one day at a time for the rest of his life.